Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Welcome home from Budapest, Ryan.
It is so good to be home. Very briefly, after my whirlwind trip to Budapest.
How was it?
You know, it was rough because I was at this really amazing conference, Megaphone 2019. But I had all this work to do in the Eastern time. So basically, I would get up and I would kind of work in the morning, do a few conferencey things, and then work all night until like 2 a.m. So it wasn't super fun, But Budapest is a beautiful town, and I met some really interesting Eastern European human rights activists. So.
And before you left, I had asked, as much as I want to talk about the human rights advocacy, I had asked if you would just do one thing for me while you were in Budapest. And I texted you while you were there.
Oh, I did. I didn't get to it.
I wanted you to ride the funicular in Budapest.
I saw it.
You saw it.
I didn't ride it, no, but I did see it.
So you couldn't take 2 minutes to ride the funicular,
well, I think it takes longer than 2 minutes. You have to like wait in a line, and you have to and it's high. You know, I don't like high things. So but I did see it, and I was like, this seems very, I can see why Kiernan would like something like this.
Yeah, we're building up to the funicular episode. Well, I'm again disappointed in you, but what else is new? Listen, Ryan, you got back in time, just right in time. We can't dilly and dally this week because I've got a meaty interview. For weeks and weeks, I've been asking listeners to send in stories of their travel disasters. And the reason for that was because I was interviewing the new New York Times travel advice columnist, Sarah Firshein. And it's called Tripped Up. That's the name of the column. And the idea is that she tackles the thorniest travel misadventures. She looks for, broad tips and tricks, strategies that she can take from bad experiences to teach all of us how to travel better. But also she seeks restitution.
Restitution.
So she's trying to do better by travelers out there. Call out companies that aren't keeping up their side of the equation. No,
she's the bargain.
She's calling out companies that aren't keeping up their side of the bargain. And it's a fascinating interview, and we got some great stories sent in by listeners. So we could only tackle a few. I think we get to about 4 or 5.
Do you cover any of my travel disasters?
We do. We talk about your travel visa issue down in Brazil.
I am so excited to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had to dig into that, of course. But before we get into that, I did think that we got an email from a listener. I have to say, it's a pretty decently sized recalculating.
Oh, what did you do wrong?
Recalculating.
Ryan, you remember what recalculating is?
Yeah, recalculating is when you've made a mistake on an episode.
No.
Or there's been an update on Wow Air.
Okay, that's well, you're in the ballpark. Okay, so recalculating is the segment in which we revisit a topic that we've talked about previously. Sometimes it's for a news update. Sometimes it is a correction. Sometimes a correction on me. Sometimes a correction on you.
Less often a correction on me.
In this case, I'm sad to say it is a correction on moi.
Wow.
So we had a listener write in to the old inbox at outofofficepod@gmail.com, where you can always get in touch with us. And this listener, her name is it's Guro. So Guro. And she said that I made the mistake of saying, do you remember a few episodes back, I was talking about another listener who in Switzerland had mixed up the dates on the chocolate that was left in her hotel room.
Right.
And I was mocking, what stupid Americans they were.
Yeah,
and,
I remember that. I joined in.
And we mocked together.
Yeah.
And then we said, this hotel staff must hate you so much. You should really throw them a few extra euros. But guess what? Switzerland, not on the euro. Switzerland is not in the European Union.
Wait, Switzerland's not in the European Union?
No. I'm going to quote to you from the American Swiss Foundation, which says, in keeping with its long tradition of sovereignty and neutrality, Switzerland is one of only a handful of Western European nations that have not joined the European Union.
Wow.
Bordered on all sides by its member states, the Swiss maintain a bilateral relationship with the EU, In 2001, Swiss citizens voted on a popular initiative to open membership negotiations, but nearly 77% of voters decided that Switzerland should remain separate from the European Union.
Wow. That's I just always assumed that Switzerland was in the European Union.
Me too, but now that you hear it, though, doesn't it actually make sense? Because we all know Switzerland likes to stay neutral.
Right.
And you could see if they were part of this larger organization, they could easily get sucked in.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, just well. So it's like Swiss francs. What do they use?
Swiss francs. That's exactly what it is. So in this recalculating, we have to say we should have said to that listener who was culturally insensitive, who was far too demanding, who wasn't appreciative of how they write the date in Switzerland and was potentially rude to the hotel staff. You should have thrown them a few extra francs. And we thank Goro for writing in. And forevermore, I do think we have to dig in a little bit more on this European Union issue. Obviously, with Brexit, it's top of mind.
Yeah.
And I think that we should maybe bring some more information about these few Western European nations that have refused to join, dig into as to why and how it affects your travel to those nations.
Yeah. I mean, in some nations, they keep their currency and let you spend euros. Like in Hungary, you've got the Huff, and everything is like 75,000 Huff. It's like one beer. It's like 4 million Huff because the Huff is not a super valuable currency. And or you can pay in euro, but if you pay in euro, everything's more expensive. So for whatever reason, Huff seems to be the way to go.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that we've lost with the European Union is I like when there used to be many, many, many more currencies. I find that very charming. Now the euro, I was thrilled to hear that the franc is still out there going strong.
Yeah, no, it's good to know that when you're getting those chocolates that you think are expired, you pay for them with franc.
Absolutely. And Ryan, I thought maybe we could leave this recalculating and we could blend into our takeoff into the interview. I dug up when in our last episode, I interviewed the author of the new Dark Skies, Lonely Planet guide, teaching us where to go to take in the stars.
Right. And she's not involved at all in the 90s extraterrestrial drama.
No, right. But you mentioned the TV credits for Dark Skies television show. I dug it up. Of course, it's on YouTube. Everything's on YouTube. And so maybe we could just hear a quick clip as we take off.
My name is John Lowengarten. I'm recording this because we may not live through the night. They're here, they're hostile, and powerful people don't want you to know. History as we know it is a lie.
My guest today is the new New York Times travel advice columnist, Sarah Firshein. And the new column is called Tripped Up. And in it, Sarah tells Times readers she promises to get restitution for their thorniest travel misadventures while providing tips and takeaways that steer onlookers away from the same fate. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on Out of Office. I love the idea of asking readers to write in their travel disasters. Because if people love talking about one thing, it is about travel disasters that have happened to them.
That's true. Thanks so much, Kiernan. I'm thrilled to be here.
So why don't we start by give us an overview of how you got to this idea for Tripped Up?
Well, I can't take full credit. I had been writing for the Times' travel section for a bit, and the new editor, Amy Vershup, approached me earlier this year in May, and she basically said what I think we all feel, which is that people have travel disasters, and there's sweet justice in getting restitution for things that go wrong. So much of travel media is prescriptive, what to do, what to see, where to go. And that's great. And that definitely has a place. I've written plenty of stories like that myself. But this in particular is a really fun assignment because it talks about real people's real travel experiences beyond, let's say, a pithy description of a cool new hotel. Which, again, has its place and can be quite useful. I mean, I take it pretty seriously, though, because the trips people go on start long before they ever get on a plane. People work their butts off and they save money and they plan, to work around vacation days, and they take their kids out of school. It takes a lot of organization and prep to plan for a trip, especially if you're, traveling with your family and things like that. And so when things go wrong, the ramifications can be quite gutting. And it's not something that I take lightly. I take each reader email very seriously, knowing that, as I think I wrote in my first column, nobody, begins the trip thinking that things are going to go wrong. We all have really high expectations that we're going to enjoy our time off.
And so I'm wondering, this idea of trying to get restitution. I mean, you're only a couple columns in at this point, but how is that going? I mean, so you're actually trying to right travel wrongs.
Yes.
It's sort of a crusading call.
Yeah, so that has been one of the more interesting elements of this column. I'm frequently asked in my personal life, where friends and family will come to me and I'll say, oh, where should I go? Where should I stay? How do I get there? What's the best credit card for travel? And I can give all the recommendations I want. But here we're really looking at trips that, have already happened and something went wrong. So this position is this position mixes journalism and advocacy, which is something that I really enjoy. My husband calls me a bit of a travel fairy godmother, which I think is an apt description.
Yes.
I always want to start out, giving the reader the benefit of the doubt and advocating for them in whatever situation they happen to find themselves in. So I would say, I don't know. I mean, if we're going to use a sports metaphor, maybe I'm batting 500 right now with restitution.
Okay. All right.
Sometimes I go into a situation knowing that it's going to be an uphill battle, if not completely impossible. And sometimes I go into a situation being like, okay, I actually think that this company, this airline, this organization is actually going to help us out and get this disaster over the finish line. But either way, I think that I can, regardless of whether or not I get restitution, I think that you can build a column around every disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm always like at the edge of my seat as to whether you're going to get restitution. I will say my experience seeking restitution for travel wrongs is not too great. The sort of landmark one was once I had a horrible layover in Colorado, and a flight got canceled, and then I got bumped from another flight and bumped from another flight. It looked like I was going to have to be there for several more days. And so I finally begged my way. I should say I cried my way onto a flight, by the way. There is I am not sensitive. You should absolutely cry in front of any manager you can get in front of.
Absolutely.
Because they will take pity and take somebody off a plane to put you on it.
Absolutely.
And it is dog eat dog out there. And so I got back home and I wrote emails to like every employee at the airline that I could. I started at the CEO. I went to the chief experience officer, the chief customer officer, the PR person, all the way down. And I got back about 10 different emails, all of which gave me a bunch of free miles on the plane. So I thought, okay, on the airline. So I thought, oh, this isn't too bad. But then they figured out that they were all giving me a ton. And then they took a bunch back, which was insane.
That's amazing. I didn't even realize they could do that. I learned something. I think that's the thing, though. I mean, there's an official channel for everything. It's just a matter of whether A, people know it exists, and B, whether they have time to pursue it, right?
Yes.
I mean,
patience.
It's patience. And it's like even the simplest things I deal with. Every time I want to put my son in an infant and lap ticket, I have to be on hold with Delta for 45 minutes, right?
Right.
So it's like if something really goes wrong, you have to multiply that times infinity, and it's just like you end up beating your head against the wall. So I guess that's where I come in.
And presumably, you have to kind of say right out that you're doing this, as a journalist for the New York Times, right?
Absolutely.
So you have a bit more power than the average consumer to get restitution.
I think so. I'd like to think that we're wielding that power for good. But certainly, I mean, some of it. Sometimes I'll email a company and I'll just know that depending on their response, it's going to be a PR disaster for them, right? And sometimes you hope that they realize that something really went wrong, and they should be writing it.
And so you've put out a call for travel disasters. What's the email that you want to get these disasters reported to? It's
travel@nytimes.com, and that goes directly to me, and it goes to my editors as well. So we're constantly reading it, and I read every single note. So that's been great.
And what kind of volume of stories are you getting? I mean, is it just hundreds a day?
I think we launched the column in mid-September. We've gotten a few hundred emails since launching. I think they come in fits and starts because the column publishes every 3 weeks. So right after we have a column go online or in print is when we get a burst of reader response, which makes sense. Some of them, frankly, are just disasters, Murphy's Law style, where it's just a confluence of bad things that all add up to one truly awful travel experience. And I've been there. I actually wrote about this in my introductory column in September, where it's just like you can't even believe your luck that one bad thing after the next keeps happening to you. I mean, that can happen. That's life, and I think others underscore, as we were just discussing, some sort of larger transgression or injustice. Perhaps an airline isn't following a certain policy that they're supposed to, or perhaps a valid complaint gets lost in that customer service nether world we were just talking about. And the reader has no idea what to do or how to move it forward. And then, I think there's a third tier where it's like questions about what to do in X and Y situation, how to become smarter and more efficient when traveling, what choices can we make now that translate to a better experience on our trip, and things like that.
And so what, are there any general trends in the stories that you're seeing being sent in? Do they kind of bucket out into certain subjects? And have you had any stories that, just have grabbed you that you found incredibly interesting?
Well, I do try to pay attention to whatever is zeitgeisty, what people are talking about, what they're wondering about. And so right now, two topics that people seem to care a lot is basic economy, which is, I mean, I hear that. It's a relatively new cabin class for airlines. And that goes along with, a whole new set of rules and regulations, many of them consumer quite unfriendly. And then the other thing that people have emailed me about, both through the tip line, and I've heard a lot of social media chatter about this as well, resort fees, which is also the subject of pending legislation in the U.S. House of Representatives. So, if you email me and you say that such and such 5-star hotel that costs $1,000 a night didn't have good food, I mean, I can't say I'm going to build an entire column around it.
Right.
I might break out the world's tiniest violin, but if I hear a lot of people complain about bad service at expensive hotels, and they're lodging questions that any traveler might find useful, how do we know what's a good hotel or not? How can we trust online reviews? What to do if our expectations fall short? Where can credit cards step in? Where can travel insurance step in? Then that might become one stepping stone or piece of fodder for a larger discussion in column form, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how many stories are you getting where, you read them and you think, this was really the traveler's fault. Like, this wasn't really the company's fault.
I don't think necessarily that there have been not so many like that. Sometimes what I will think is not that it's the traveler's fault, but it's just that the traveler didn't understand X, Y, and Z thing, right? And I've certainly been in that position myself, where you get outraged at something and you realize, okay, actually, if I had read the terms and conditions, or if I truly understand, let's say, what type of airline ticket I was buying, I would realize that this is actually a policy. It's just a policy that I don't like, if that makes sense.
Yeah. See, I put out a call to listeners to send in some of their travel disasters, and we're going to talk through a couple of them. But a few that I got in, I just thought, this could be chalked up more to disorganization than to actual any fault. So I don't know if any restitution is deserved here. So it was funny that I felt like suddenly I was in the place of like a judge, of where fault laid. And, you're going to have to think about that through. I like your approach of basically seeing if there are themes that emerge across many different stories.
Yeah, I mean, and then there are ones that are just obviously just so egregious that you can't help but dig into. As a writer, I can't help but dig into it. I am about to file one actually about a woman with severe food allergies. She was denied boarding on an international flight, from Cape Town to Dubai. And she was basically taken into a room and interrogated by airline staff. She was berated. She was embarrassed in front of her travel companions. And so that's a very extreme case of what airlines are supposed to not do in regards to their handling of passengers with food allergies. But that's a great example of a sort of plainly obvious disaster that translates well into a column, because the letter got me thinking about how little people without food allergies know about what it's like to travel if you do have food allergies. So I'm about to file that one. It will publish in a few weeks. And then the other one that I think it was illustrative of where I hope this column goes. Is I got a letter a little while ago from a family who lost their home in the Bahamas during one of the more recent hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
And they were basically trying to get their money, which amounted to like 15 grand, back from a cruise they had been supposed to take.
Oh,
Not only
geez.
did they need that money to rebuild their house, like physically, because it had been destroyed,
Yeah.
but they had no way at that point of actually leaving the island and getting to the port of embarkation, which it was in Europe.
Yeah.
So after months of going back and forth with not only the family, but also the cruise line, that one is slowly coming together. But that's an example of a particularly sensitive one, because you want to make sure that as a journalist, you're treating it with compassion and you're being humane about how you're portraying the disaster and sort of what things are like for this family right now. These are real people. So I try to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah. Wow. So it doesn't surprise me that you're seeing a lot of the stories come in from super experienced travelers, right? Because
Right.
I'm guessing that tends to be the person who comes in and reads the travel section regularly.
Sure.
But it seems to me like Tripped Up takes an approach that it has kind of a broader appeal to people who beyond the super traveler.
As I was saying before, that's a big part of what I think about when I'm thinking about which stories to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
You can be the most experienced traveler in the world and not understand what it's like to get on a plane with food allergies. So,
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to not only seek the wrongs that readers have experienced, but also broaden, other readers' horizons and provide a level of knowledge and insight that they may find interesting.
And so I thought maybe we could dive into some of the stories that we got from out of
Sure.
office listeners to get your takes on these travel disasters. I can't get, I just want to caveat listeners, we are not giving restitution on these
We are
stories. I
not.
hope I was clear enough on that in previous teases.
Not unless you give me like 2 months to work on each one.
So I tried to choose ones and shared with you, Sarah, beforehand, so you could do a little research. Ones that have that tackle pretty common issues that people who take airlines, who travel, especially a lot of these were pretty Europe focused,
Right.
encounter. And so the first one was written in by a listener that signed it Lost Luggage, which I think everybody's familiar with that problem. My co-host Ryan calls himself a forever check, where he always checks his bag no matter what. He never carries on.
Wow.
I'm exactly the opposite because of
Yep.
stories like this one.
Yep.
So Lost Luggage wrote just a beautiful narrative recounting of this story, but I'm just going to quickly summarize it, and we're gonna pick apart some of the very interesting kind of international agreements that guide lost luggage policy. So this listener was traveling around Italy, and he was taking the airline Alitalia. And unfortunately, his luggage was lost between Rome and Brindisi, and for 5 days did not show up, despite many reassurances from the airline, from the hotels, that they were going to work together to get it to him. He ended up having to go and buy shirts and sandals and a whole wardrobe. But, he at least acknowledges, I was in southern Italy. I was spending my days pleasantly, sipping alcohol and eating delicious pasta. And so he wasn't too concerned about it. But he finally goes back to the airport after 5 days to get his flight back to go on his way home to America. And he goes up to the what it was called, he thinks, the luggage authority window. And the befuddled agent says to him, I don't see anything in the computer. And you can come back into the storage room and have a look around, but I don't think you're going to find anything here. And he goes in and he says it was like a practical joke. In the very middle of the room is sitting his luggage with no tag on it, no idea how it got there. And, it'd clearly just been sitting in this storage room for 5 days, not working its way through the system. And so it had its frustrations, but he went back and he did a bunch of research, and he came upon something called the Montreal Convention, which, quote, establishes airline liability in the case of death or injury to passengers, as well in cases of delay, damage, or loss of baggage and cargo. So he wants to know, does the Montreal Convention give him any coverage on this lost luggage issue? And, more generally, how should people approach when their luggage is nowhere to be seen?
So I hate to say it, but this one really cracked me up. I I studied for a semester in college in Bologna, Italy, and I've been back to Italy many times since. So I totally know what this guy is talking about when he's hinting at some of the, let's say, inefficiencies you experience as a
Yes.
traveler in Italy,
Uh-huh.
particularly when you're not Italian and you have a very American perspective about customer service and like getting things done and being organized.
Especially like if you're an East Coast American, I feel like
yeah.
you expect like, I said I need my luggage
Yep.
now.
Yeah, you're basically just like walking around making demands.
Yeah,
And everybody
exactly.
there is just like drinking wine. It's great. But this incident obviously isn't specific to Italy, nor is it specific to all Italia. I've received dozens and dozens of letters about lost luggage all over the world on all different airlines and sort of with all different customer service channels. Actually, it's funny that you said that Ryan is he's an always checker.
He's
Is
an
that what you
always
call?
check. He's an always
Because
check.
until I had a baby, I was exclusively a carry-on packer. I mean, I did 2.5 weeks in Vietnam with just a carry-on because I've always had this sort of semi-irrational fear of luggage getting lost.
Oh, absolutely the same.
So the one thing that stood out to me about this disaster in particular is that, this listener really did his research. I think he's right. Most people have never heard of the Montreal Convention, which is and just to summarize, is a treaty that was established in 99, I believe, in an effort to provide some consistency among airline liabilities surrounding everything from passenger death and injuries to lost or delayed luggage in this case. So the treaty has been signed by 120, 130 countries, something like that, including most certainly the US and Italy. So basically, if you're traveling between any of the countries that have signed the treaty, you can get a certain sum of financial restitution if your bag is lost or delayed. That sum fluctuates based on IMF currency valuations, but it's usually about $1,500. So the other thing is there's another U.S. law that specifically applies to domestic flights, and that one caps airline liability at $3,500. So the thing to remember is that travel insurance can sometimes help with this, as can baggage delay protection embedded into your credit card benefits.
Mm-hmm.
The hitch is that you have to pay for the flights with that card. So in my case, we have a Chase Sapphire Reserve, not sponsored. But
can I tell you, I just got a thrill that you said that, because that's my go-to travel card as well.
It's the best. I love it.
It is the best.
We use that and the Amex Platinum sort of interchangeably. But anyway, they both have great benefits, but the Chase Sapphire Reserve in particular offers $100 a day for, I think, 5 days, not only for myself, but for my immediate family. So if my luggage for my son gets lost, they would pay for diapers and things like that. But this guy did everything right. He filed his complaint directly with the airline. That's always the first thing you're supposed to do. I read the letter. It sounds like he had all the proper documentation. He doggedly followed up. He filed through official channels. And as he pointed out, he got $300 and a free Italian wardrobe. And he got a great story. So
yeah, that's right.
So there we are.
All right. Well, a second listener wrote in a story titled it Carpe Diem. And this one is built around food poisoning. And again, sort of a tome came in, but I'm just going to summarize it here. I have to imagine that must happen with your stories too, is that you must get emails that are just pages and pages long, and you need to fit it into a column of like 1,500 words, right?
I've gotten multi-page PDF documents.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's fun to write down your travel disasters in retrospect, no question.
Well, and then a lot of the times people already have documentation because they've already been emailing back and forth with an airline, or they've been emailing back and forth with a credit card. So they already have these emails, and they've like figured out how to merge all the documents into a PDF, which honestly I appreciate, because then if I'm reaching out to a company, then I already have all the information right there.
Right. So Carpe Diem was traveling around Spain and decided that in a weekend wanted to take a quick southern tour of Cordoba, Seville, and Granada. And before heading out from Madrid, had a real craving for seafood and ordered clams, octopus, and gooseneck barnacles, which I want to give the listener credit, wrote look like little alien fingers and tastes like lobster. So, maybe the food section can follow up on that.
Very descriptive.
Yes.
He should be a food writer.
And immediately, he or she, I don't know, there are no pronouns used here,
Mhm.
Got back to the hotel and promptly got sick to the stomach and clearly food poisoning. But
Mm.
because this traveler was a young person, rallied and took a few extra hours at the hotel, but then, kind of got on the train, got on the bus, and went on the Southern tour anyway. And,
Mm.
that's where the Carpe Diem sort of title comes from. And so the question to you is, one, how would you approach this sort of like emergency medical sort of situation?
Mhm.
Food poisoning in Spain maybe is not as touchy as food poisoning in more kind of out of the way places.
Mhm.
And secondly, is Carpe Diem the right approach to take here?
It's funny. Something similar happened to my husband on our honeymoon. We spent a week in Morocco and a week in Portugal, and right around the midway point of that trip, he got food poisoning or a
Ah,
stomach
jeez.
bug, something like that. He was he was a real trooper, though. He obviously didn't want to ruin the experience for me, so I sort of dragged him to trendy restaurants in Lisbon, and he just sort of sat there propped up. And he was assuring me that everything was fine because that's the type of guy he is.
For
But
what it's worth, on our honeymoon in Peru, my wife got pneumonia, and we
uh,
still did the Salcante trek to Machu Picchu, which I
wow,
still am
that's
amazed by.
incredible.
Yeah,
She sounds
yeah,
like Superwoman.
yeah. Both of those spouses deserve big call outs.
Yeah, totally. I know I've been sick several times while traveling, and it can be really tough. We were baby mooning in Paris a couple of years ago, and I basically spent the entire week not eating in like the restaurant capital of the world.
Hmm.
And but it's funny, I had booked this macaron making class. And I had prepaid for it and I was very excited about it. And I didn't want the entire trip to go to waste. So I
Mm-hmm.
sort of forced myself to get to this French cooking school. And we show up and we're like wearing these cute little aprons, and there's this wonderful cooking instructor with this amazing French accent teaching my husband how to sift almond flour into a bowl and how to pipe macaroons onto a sheet. And all of a sudden, I find myself lurching downstairs
Oh,
to the bathroom
geez.
to puke my guts out.
Sure.
So, I commend this person for soldiering through. I am an absolute wreck when I'm sick. It doesn't matter where in the world I am.
Mm-hmm.
I can barely function. But I've also found that it's interesting, those moments can be just as revealing about a place as the healthier and more functioning moments. I got food poisoning a few years ago in London when I was visiting my brother. And it was actually so bad that I had to push my flight home back by a day and extend the hotel room by a night
Oh,
because,
golly.
oh, yeah, I just couldn't imagine getting out of bed. And I certainly could not imagine sitting in the middle seat of a plane.
Right.
Um, so it was like this little hotel near where my brother lived at the time. And it wasn't particularly remarkable, just sort of a small boutique hotel with tiny rooms. But I will never forget how hospitable they were and the way they let me extend the room for the same online booking rate, and how they kept calling to check whether I needed toast and bananas,
Oh, wow.
and how this random bellhop, yeah, he left at 4 a.m. to get me whatever the British equivalent of Imodium was. That's really the stuff that you remember most about a trip.
Right, right.
So, I've stayed at some extraordinary hotels over the last few years for work. But that little one with zero street cred among all of my travel writer friends has probably set the benchmark for standard for hospitality and for customer service standards anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
So yeah.
So what would you recommend to folks who, I mean, so often it does seem to be stomach issues.
Yes.
You get regular travel stomach even in the best of
Yeah.
times. And then,
Sure.
in the worst, you eat something that's unfamiliar, or maybe the hygiene practices are different in the country that you're traveling. So,
Totally.
what should travelers do when they're having medical issues?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would do, it depends on where you're staying. If you're staying in a hotel, oftentimes they can call a doctor or call the pharmacy for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you're just wandering around the street, we had to go to a pharmacy in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. You walk into a pharmacy and you explain what the issue is and hope that somebody can help you. I'm trying to
Right.
think. In Sicily this summer, my husband, this is I wrote about the Sicily disaster in one of my introductory columns for the Times. I got food poisoning on that trip. It resolved itself after a day, but it kind of went around our group. So by the time we got to this beautiful villa rental in Sicily, overlooking Sicilian wine country, you couldn't imagine a more beautiful place. My poor husband had gotten food
Oh,
poisoning, right?
gosh. Thanks,
So
Sarah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so meanwhile, we have like my brother, I have the baby. We're all just sort of trying to figure out what is going on. But we use Google Maps. We found a pharmacy. I summoned my college era Italian to basically say that my husband has a stomach problem.
Was
We went
dying.
to a Yeah, literally dying, never getting back to the US. Um, Actually, like we were driving around this tiny town and there was nothing open for whatever reason. It was like this ghost town in Western Sicily. And I walk into what looks sort of like a Dwayne Reed, meet the guy at the cashier. He is talking to the sort of this other Sicilian guy. They're basically putting their heads together and trying to figure out how I can get to a pharmacy. So we end up following this other customer to the pharmacy, which was around the corner, but wasn't on Google Maps. So anyway, at the end of the day, we went to the pharmacy. We got my husband the medicine he needs, and he was okay after a day or two.
And actually, I like the go to a pharmacy approach because I have found that in many other countries, pharmacists are they're maybe not as powerful as doctors, but they are able to give you simple prescriptions, sometimes for medications that you would need to go to a proper doctor in the U.S. To get, but you can get something
Absolutely.
that's like pretty
Yes.
strong just over the counter.
I had that experience. I had that experience in Thailand where we were in the south of Thailand. I don't know, maybe it was like 5 or 6 years ago, and I just got bitten all over my feet.
Huh.
And I usually travel with a drugstore aisle cortisone cream,
Yeah.
just because that's always in my DAP kit. Fine, but that just clearly wasn't going to do it. And so we went to this pharmacy, and this lady handed me this tube, and I was like, okay, I don't even know idea what this is, but it cleared up the mosquito bites in a day. And I looked it up, and they definitely do not give it over the counter in the U.S.
Oh, amazing.
So I kept it and I used it as long as possible.
I was just about to
Obviously.
say, next time you're there, load up.
Yep. Yep.
So we have three more stories in from listeners that I picked out that I think are quicker hits, kind of much pithier than those longer narratives we gave. The first was a reminiscence by somebody who signed it unaccompanied minor. Once I was traveling alone as an unaccompanied minor from LAX to Pasco, Washington. I was supposed to change at San Francisco, and the flight got canceled, and I spent 8 hours roaming the San Francisco airport alone until the next flight. My parents were besides themselves with fury when they found out I was 11. I'm now in my early 50s. The airline just sort of abandoned me, and I was fine, but it was extremely not normal.
I assume this was like pre-yoga room SFO, right?
Yeah, it does sound that way for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, is unaccompanied minor even still? I mean, surely airlines must still have some responsibility in that
Oh,
category.
absolutely. I don't know what the policies were 40 years ago, but there are, now they vary widely by airline with many things factoring in, including the age of the kids flying, whether it's a domestic or international flight, whether it's nonstop or connecting, et cetera. So one thing that's universal is that airlines charge for what they're considering a service. It includes things like extra check-ins with airport security and personnel, pre-boarding, where they not only show the kids the seatbelt and things like that, but also they might let them go into the cockpit and meet the pilots, and then escorted handoff whenever they reach their arrival. Parents usually have to pay around $150 each way for every 2 kids on top of the tickets themselves, and that varies by airline as well. Alaska, I believe, is one of the cheapest. It's like $50 each way or 75 for a connecting flight, I want to say. So the age ranges vary too, although most unaccompanied minor policies start around 5. And this is really terrifying, actually. Some airlines, JetBlue in particular comes to mind, allow kids as young as 2 to travel with a 14-year-old. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, you have a son. I have a son. It's hard for me to imagine that, but obviously there are circumstances where families might need to sort of enact that sort of thing. And then there are variances on the top end ranges as well. Some airlines cap their unaccompanied minor policies around 12, others go up to 14. So in this case, most 11-year-olds would be able to take a connecting flight of some sort, but that also varies too. Some airlines say that the connection can't be more than 2 hours. Other airlines, American, for example, only allows connections in certain major airports like LAX and JFK, where presumably they have personnel who can handle the kids and move them from one flight to another.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I had never heard of. I mean, it's interesting that the policies vary so differently among airlines.
They're so different, and families have choices certainly, and some airlines are just naturally more family friendly than others. But what shouldn't happen, regardless of airline, is that an unaccompanied minor wandering around unsupervised overnight in an airport seems like not a thing that should happen. And to that effect, most airlines do have rules built in that say that if there's a substantial delay with the connecting flight, that they'll pay for overnight accommodations, hotels, meals, that sort of thing for the unaccompanied minor.
I mean, that seems like a perfect plot of the newest Home Alone that should be coming out on Disney Plus any day now.
San Francisco Airport is probably not the worst place to be wandering around overnight.
Fair point. All right. Well, another listener wrote in a story to our email. They said, actually, it's no story, but just a basic question. And this is something that I've wondered myself. I know I live in total fear of losing my passport or license. So they just wrote, no story exactly, but I live in fear of losing my passport when I'm abroad or losing my license when traveling in the U.S. If that happens, is there a way to fly home? What are the right steps to take?
Okay, so this is a huge fear. I've had this fear as well. The thing to remember is that you will get home for sure. You're not going to get stuck wherever you are, although maybe you want to.
You don't have to set up a new life.
No, you don't have to set up a new life, although it sounds kind of romantic depending on where you are. But you need a physical passport in order to do it. So that's just the reality. Like the photocopies that your mom told you to make when you were a teenager help to some degree because they might prove citizenship, but they're not going to get you on a plane and they're not going to get you back into the U.S. So you basically have to go to an embassy or a consulate, and they have a whole process, and they're used to dealing with this. In fact, I think the State Department actually has a page specifically dedicated to the subject, which underscores either how common it is, but also how many people have this anxiety. So you have to report your passport lost or stolen. You have to let them know when you're supposed to go home, and they'll obviously tell you the procedure from there. But usually it requires that you get passport photos. Often requires that you have proof of citizenship, which is where those passport photocopies come in handy. I happen to keep an emailed scan of my passport in my email at all times. I always have it, right? Because I always have my email. And I find that not only does it could it potentially help in a situation like this, but it's like whenever we're doing something, let's say related to, our mortgage or something where you might need a passport, my husband will be like, "Hey, can I get your passport number?" And I can just email it right to him.
Yep. I do the exact same thing.
Yeah. It's just, then you don't have to use photocopies. But my biggest piece of advice here is, and this is something that I learned the hard way, it sounds so simple, but the hotel safe is make friends with it, and get into the habit of immediately putting your passports and valuables in there when the second you get into the room, and making it the last thing you check before you leave. Like it should be the first and last thing you do at any hotel room. I learned that the hard way because I had a diamond ring stolen from a 5-star hotel in Paris a couple of years ago.
Whoa.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We didn't have valuables insurance, and it was a whole hoop to do.
But
so you only need one of those experiences to make you realize that the hotel safe is there for a reason. And I also understand that there's a zillion ways for somebody to lose a passport, even if they are using the safe. But that's just a small step that I think people don't even realize they should be taking.
And do you know, if you're flying just within the U.S., I know we're moving into the Real ID, I think in October 2020. Will it be similar standards around like what we require for passports, where if you don't have your Real ID, you're going to have a tough time getting through security?
I actually don't know. So
I'm not even positive they've made that public yet, honestly.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's a great question, and I really hope somebody asked it in the column because I think that a lot of people probably wonder about that. I frankly haven't even thought about it, which I guess I should be.
All right, Real ID folks, watch this space. And the final travel disaster I want to talk about is one that we just talked about a few weeks ago, and I love talking about it while he's not here. My co-host Ryan has a great story where he was flying from Italy to Brazil. He was meeting a friend who was coming from New York to Brazil, and he was on the tarmac in Italy, and he gets a phone call from his friend in the U.S., his travel companion. He says, "Hey, so we're not going to be able to do this trip. We just booked thousands of dollars." And Ryan said, "What do you mean? I'm about to take off." And he said, "No, we didn't get travel visas." Ryan said, "We need travel visas? I didn't even realize that." And as they're discussing the logistics, Ryan's plane takes off in Italy. He was literally on the tarmac. takes off in Italy, and he has, a 10-hour transatlantic flight just to wonder about what's going to happen on the other side. And
God.
so he
I hope
gets
they had good movies and food on that flight.
Ryan's much more laid back than you and I seem to be in our travel preparation. So he just assumed something would figure itself out. So he gets off the plane and he realizes there are two doors you could go through. One, which is to go make connections, and the other, which is to go enter Brazil. And he said, I don't know which of these doors to go into. And as he's sitting there lingering, considering his options, security starts to come around him and the pressure builds very, very quickly to the point where he was surrounded by security guards who were threatening to kind of bring him back into a room out of the main airport. And he held them at bay and on his phone booked a connecting flight to Panama City just because he knew that's a place that he could get into without a visa. He got through the connections. He got on a flight to Panama City and ended up spending his vacation that was planned for Brazil, actually in Mexico City. He continued on. So a real travel disaster could have been solved by 10 minutes of Googling, do I need a travel visa to go to Brazil? And I just wonder what you would recommend for an approach to travel visas, or when you find yourself in this sort of compromised circumstance.
Okay. Well, I don't want to say I wouldn't find myself in that circumstance because that sounds terrible.
Hear that, but, Ryan? She wouldn't find herself in that circumstance.
Awful.
Also, let me just point out, he hosts a travel podcast. Anyway.
I know. Well, all right. So the State Department has a whole list of visa requirements for travelers coming with U.S. passports, so American citizens traveling abroad. The U.S. passport is among the more flexible passports in the world, meaning that you can do more with a U.S. passport than you can do with some other countries. So you don't necessarily, obviously, you don't necessarily need a visa for every place you want to go, which makes it easy to travel abroad as a U.S. citizen. Some countries offer visa on arrival. Vietnam does that, although you can also go to the Vietnamese embassy or consulate here in New York and get it before, which is what we did, which I would recommend any traveler do because it saves you the hassle of waiting in a long line after you've gotten off a 12, 14-hour flight, whatever it may be. And then some countries do not offer visa on arrival, meaning that you have to have a visa in order to enter it, and you have to have a visa in hand. Brazil, up until June, was a country that you needed to have a visa in hand in order to enter, and they just waived their visa requirements for U.S. citizens. So it sounds like Ryan's trip was perhaps a few years too soon, and if he were to try to go back now without a visa, it would be no problem.
Well, Sarah Firshein, thank you so much for coming on Out of Office. We covered a lot of territory here: lost luggage, medical disasters, lost passports. I am going to include in the show notes links out to your current columns. And also, you referenced a couple resources online that I'll also include links onto. And one more time, what is the email that folks can send you their stories?
It's just travel@nytimes.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And now it's time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
Well, Kiernan, it's nice to hear that somebody is sticking up for the traveler and all this, because these big companies, these airlines, these hotels, these travel groups, they can sometimes, it feels like they can take advantage of you. So to have a sort of 7 on your side kind of situation going on at the Times, I think is great.
Congratulations to Sarah. Keep up fighting the good fight. And, we encourage all our listeners to shoot your stories over there to the New York Times, and hopefully you get a little money in your pocket. But Ryan, we are here in the last stop. This is the last segment of the show, the final segment. That's why we call it the last stop, I don't know if you've ever picked up on that.
I have. It is a segment where people take a deep breath and they go, whew.
That's right.
It's almost over.
That's right. It's a moment. Well, I like to think that that's not the reason that they're excited about it, but it's a moment. It's a time. It's a segment. It's a place where you and I each take just a little bit of airtime to talk about one thing that we did, or we saw, or we experienced. Maybe we bought it. It could be something we read. It might be something we cooked. It could be something we created. It might be a trip that we just took. Whatever it is, it's a thing that feeds the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workday week. So it's it's a little bit of inspiration.
Right.
So Ryan, I have to ask you this week, do you have that little bit of inspiration? Do you have a last stop?
So, Kiernan, you know that you were known on this podcast as the national park guy. People say,
I am. That's true. Out of the two of us,
National Park Kiernan.
That's everybody call it. That's why my the initial is P. It stands for park.
So I want to get into the park spirit, but I've never really been a national park guy like you have. But then this week, the Trump administration announced they were mulling proposals, according to the Los Angeles Times, mulling proposals to privatize national park campgrounds. And add things like expanded Wi-Fi service, food trucks, and get this, Amazon deliveries at campsites. So you don't even have to leave behind your Amazon deliveries now. When you're out there in the beautiful woods, a gentleman from UPS will show up with your big box of, crap. And you can have it right there at the campsite.
It's upsetting. It's an upsetting story. You shared it with me a little bit before the recording, and I'm still upset by it. Now, here. There's one thing in here that I actually have to say I think it's kind of a good idea. I know it's shocking for me to say that, but I don't think Amazon packages that they should be stopped at the gates. I do think, just FYI, this is not as revolutionary as you might think. Many private purveyors are already inside the parks. Many of the hotels, the great lodges that we know and love inside the national parks, are run by private companies in partnership with the government.
Are they difficult to book? Because one of the things that the Trump administration says is we can bring in Priceline and Hotels.com and make it easier to book these hotels. Is that a real problem?
It varies from park to park, but I would be lying to you if I said there weren't certain parks where it is hard to book. Yes.
Yeah.
One that comes to mind is in the North Cascades in Washington, in Rockport, Washington, right up against Canada. You've got a national park there, and they've got something called they've got something called the Ross Lake Resort. These are cabins that actually float on a lake. And I've emailed them several times, never have gotten a response, and you can't book them online. So, that's a case where I do wish there was a better solution for it.
Well, another thing, and you're always talking about over-tourism in these parks, they want to get rid of senior discounts during peak holiday season. So get those pesky seniors out of those parks. What are they doing? What are they doing there? They don't even care. The seniors don't even want Amazon delivered to them. What are they at a park for?
Well, and okay, but it was not the seniors and it was not the booking that is something that I could get behind. What I like is the mention of food trucks. Now, this I think might be a decent solution because inside the parks, it can be very hard to get a decent meal. And even when you do, it is often very overpriced. I like the idea of a taco truck, a barbecue truck, pulling in. Maybe I get a little bibimbap before I take on that hike. I mean,
Totally.
That is a solution that I think all Americans can get behind. But generally, I think this is in a bad way.
So knowing Donald Trump like I do, I imagine these food Trumps would all be like, Trump pizza, Trump hot dogs. It's not like
steaks is back.
Yeah, it's not like he's gonna allow independent small business owners. It'll be Walmart food trucks or something like that.
Yeah, fair point. I hadn't thought about that. All right, you're right. Wholesale rejection of the policy. I'm done.
Well, anyway, I'm looking forward to being able to use my phone and get deliveries while I'm trying to enjoy America's great national parks. So, Kiernan, do you have a last stop this week?
I do have a last stop, Ryan. Now, I recently there's the fruit of my womb is now pitter-pattering around the house. Well, not pitter-pattering because this is a newborn, so he's just laying there. He's laying there around the house.
He's very talkative.
He is talkative. Occasionally gets on the mic. We appreciate it. Credit to Charlie. And so we've got this nursery that we're decorating out.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out how to bring a little bit of culture and travel class, to the nursery.
So you could make it like it could be airport lounge themed.
Well, what? So uncomfortable ripped chairs and
plugs that don't work. I mean, I think that would be. Charlie would appreciate it.
I like it. I like that. All right, never mind. We're tearing up the plan. We're going back to that. No. What we have is we've got two pieces of art that are up that they're by this cartoonist. His name is Jason Pollan. Have you ever heard of him? It's Pollan.
I have not.
He has a book that's out, is a very good book called Every Person in New York, where he just sketches scenes and individuals that he sees around New York City.
Right.
But on these two particular prints, which I bought off a great website that if you don't know it, you should definitely get to know it. It's a website where independent artists get to sell their wares. It's called 20 by 200, Art for Everyone. So it's 20x200.com. And he sketches exhibits that he has seen at the American Museum of Natural History right there in New York, which you know is a favorite of mine.
That's
it's a favorite of yours.
Yeah.
And so we have two. One is mammalian skeletons. And so you've got things like the Irish elk. And the other is birds from the Hall of Birds. You've got owls and storks and all manner of bird. And every time I go into the room, it reminds me that, your nursery, it doesn't have to be just like pictures of Barney. That's the second Barney mention in 2 episodes, by the way.
By the way, I don't know.
3 episodes.
I don't know that Barney is still hip with the kids these days.
I don't know about these Gen Z babies out there.
Yeah, I don't think your baby's Gen Z, by the way. I think it's another.
What's a baby? What generation is a baby?
What's a baby? Well, whatever comes after Gen Z. But I
Do
don't
we just
think
go back to the start and Gen AA?
Gen AA would have been my gen.
So anyway, these works of art by Jason Pollan, I couldn't recommend them enough. I think there are still some prints available. If not, you should just text him directly. He's a great artist, very talented, a New York personality. I will put up a link to them in the show notes. Maybe I'll pop an Instagram up on the show Instagram page, which is @OOO podcast, like @podcast. And, it makes me feel like I'm back in the American Museum of Natural History. And through that I'm out exploring the world because they've got treasures from all over the world.
They absolutely do. So when will Charlie get to come and experience the Museum of Natural History?
I think he's got his neck is getting stronger every day. And that would be the first thing that I want to straighten itself out before we get on an Amtrak down to see you. But here in Boston, we've got that guest room ready for you, and you've told me you're going to come.
Yeah, I'm most definitely going to come. I'm excited. Wait, when are you going to invite me?
I invite you constantly.
I invited myself the week that it was actually next weekend. We never got it. We need to make it happen.
Yeah.
Generation Alpha, by the way, is your baby.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's so strong.
Yeah.
Oh, Generation Alpha.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, what are we talking about next week?
So next week, we're going to talk about the great city of Nashville. I've been there recently. You've been a couple times. We're going to combine our powers and come up with some really fantastic recommendations on how to have a good time in Nashville. I was about to say Music City, but it's not. It's not that's Detroit. Yeah.
No, yeah, we're gonna, and I think we'll probably tackle some of the popular places. Give our opinion on whether they're worth your time. There's a couple that I'm gonna weigh in and say aren't worth your time, and then a couple offbeat treasures that you must get to.
Yeah, here's a couple nicknames for Nashville: Athens of the South.
I know why they call it that. We'll get into that in the episode.
The Protestant Vatican, which I think is really funny because I texted my mom and I said, this is like white baby boomer heaven here.
That's funny.
Smashville.
Oh, because like smash music hits.
Yeah. Buckle of the Bible Belt.
Sure.
Nash Vegans, which Nash Vegas. And last, Cashville.
All right.
For Johnny Cash. Anyway, we can unpack all these.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about all those things on the next episode.
Well, until we get to, but Music City, USA is on this list. Well, anyway, we can unpack that next
All
week.
right, we're gonna have to dig into those. Yeah, maybe to start a rivalry between Detroit and Nashville.
Okay, just what Detroit needs. Well, until next week, I'm Ryan Davis,
and I'm Kiernan Schmidt,
and this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
The seat taken.
So, what would you have delivered to your campsite?
In the national park.
Yeah.
Maybe some moleskin. Do you know moleskin? It helps with your blisters. Absolutely. Sometimes your boots aren't fitting.
Yeah. Moleskin. You always gotta have moleskin around.
Oh, and also I have very sensitive skin. Maybe I'd get some calamine lotion. Be the nerdiest delivery Amazon's ever made.